Keanu Reeves was denied entry to grant a dying fan's wish. What happened next moved everyone to tears. The automatic glass doors of St. Margaret's Hospital whooshed open, letting in the brisk February air. Keanu Reeves stepped inside, his boots muffled by the sterile linoleum floor. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and faintly of coffee from the kiosk in the corner, where exhausted staff grabbed brief moments of solace. Keanu adjusted his cap, pulling it low over his face, his sharp jawline partly obscured by his unshaven face. He wasn't here to be recognized. In fact, he hoped to avoid it altogether. But the weight of the small envelope tucked in the inner pocket of his jacket reminded him of why he had come. His steps, slow but purposeful, carried him past waiting families and whispered conversations, each person absorbed in their own worries. When he reached the reception desk of the cancer ward, he cleared his throat gently. The receptionist, a young man with a badge that read Timothy, glanced up from his computer. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Keanu said, his voice low and polite. "I'm here to see Michael Hernandez. He's in room 214. I believe his family's expecting me." Timothy's brow furrowed, his eyes flicking from Keanu's face to the screen. "I don't have anything here about a visitor for 214. Are you a relative?" Keanu shook his head. "No, I'm just a friend. His sister wrote to me." Timothy's demeanor hardened. "I'm sorry, but only family or pre-approved visitors are allowed on this floor." His voice was professional but firm. Keanu tried again, his tone remaining calm. "Look, I understand the policy, but this is important. Could you double-check with his family? Or perhaps someone on the medical staff?" Timothy hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. His eyes lingered on Keanu's face for a moment longer, something vaguely familiar tugging at the edges of his recognition. But then he straightened. "I'm sorry, sir, but unless you're on the approved list, I can't let you in." The faint buzz of activity around the ward seemed to grow louder. A nurse in scrubs passed by with a clipboard, and a security guard stationed near the elevators shifted his weight, eyeing the interaction. Keanu exhaled, pressing his lips into a thin line. "Is there someone I could speak to?" he asked, his voice steady. "Maybe the attending physician." Timothy sighed, clearly uncomfortable with the persistence. "I'll see what I can do, but you'll need to wait over there." He gestured toward a row of plastic chairs by the wall. Keanu gave a small nod. "Thank you." He moved to the waiting area, taking a seat on one of the chairs. It creaked slightly under his weight, and he set his bag at his feet, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow over the room. A few people sitting nearby began to glance in his direction, their murmured conversations trailing off. A young boy tugged on his mother's sleeve, whispering excitedly as he pointed toward Keanu. The mother hushed him quickly, though she stole a curious look herself. Keanu ignored the growing whispers, his eyes fixed on the scuffed floor tiles. "Patience," he told himself. "They'll figure it out soon enough." Minutes ticked by. Timothy spoke in hushed tones on the phone behind the desk, occasionally casting wary glances at Keanu. The security guard, a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head, began to edge closer to the waiting area, his expression wary but non-confrontational. Finally, the guard approached. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice low but firm. "I understand you are waiting to visit someone on this floor, but we're going to need some more information. Can I see some ID?" Keanu looked up, meeting the man's eyes with an almost disarming calmness. He pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license. The guard studied it briefly, his frown deepening. "Look," Keanu said, his voice quiet but steady. "I know I'm not on the list, and I know this is unorthodox. But I promise you, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just here to honor someone's wish. If you need to verify anything, I can wait." The guard hesitated, clearly torn. He handed back the ID and crossed his arms, glancing toward the desk. "We're going to have to clear this with administration. Just sit tight, okay?" Keanu nodded. "Take your time." As the guard returned to the desk, a young nurse with a pixie cut and a nervous smile approached Keanu. Are you really Keanu Reeves?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He offered her a faint smile. "I am. And yes, I'm here for Michael." Her eyes widened. "Oh my gosh, I think his sister mentioned something about you. Hold on, let me check." She darted off toward the nurse's station, leaving Keanu alone once again. The whispers in the waiting area grew louder, but Keanu remained composed, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. Outside the ward, the world felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the next moment to unfold. And so he waited. Calm, quiet, and unshakable, he prepared himself for what lay beyond those heavy doors, whatever it might take to fulfill the promise he had come to keep. The letter had arrived unexpectedly. Keanu had been sifting through a stack of fan mail on a quiet evening in his Los Angeles home when the simple envelope caught his attention. Unlike the glossy headshots or vibrant cards with scripted messages, this one was plain and handwritten, the looping scrawl on the front reading, "Mr. Keanu Reeves, important." Curious, he'd opened it. Inside was a single page, slightly crumpled, the ink smudged in places, as if the writer's hand had trembled. The letter began, "Dear Mr. Reeves, I know this is a long shot, but I don't know where else to turn. My brother Michael is 17 years old and he's dying of cancer. He has been your biggest fan for as long as I can remember. When he was first diagnosed at 13, your movies were his escape. He watched The Matrix so many times he could recite it by heart. And he always said that if Neo could keep fighting, so could he. But now he's running out of time. I don't know if you'll even see this, but his dream, his final dream, is to meet you. Just a few minutes with you would mean the world to him. And to me. Thank you for reading this, even if you can't come. Sincerely, Emma Hernandez." The words were simple but raw, and they hit Keanu with a force he hadn't expected. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the letter for a long time. Over the years, he'd received countless messages from fans, many of them touching, but something about this one felt different. Perhaps it was the vulnerability in Emma's words, the way she poured her desperation into each sentence. Or maybe it was the thought of a young boy clinging to hope through his movies, a connection Keanu didn't take lightly. But most of all, it was the timing. Keanu's mind drifted to memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. The hospital corridors he'd walked with heavy steps when his sister Kim had been battling leukemia. The quiet hours spent at her bedside, holding her hand as she fought through pain and exhaustion. And before that, the unimaginable grief of losing his daughter, Ava, followed by the death of her mother, Jennifer. Loss had shaped him, carved out pieces of his heart that would never quite heal. He understood all too well the helplessness of watching someone you love slip away. That night, Keanu didn't sleep much. He sat by the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Emma's letter still clutched in his hand. By morning, he'd made up his mind. There was no hesitation. He called his team, canceled a string of meetings, and booked the first available flight to the city where St. Margaret's Hospital was located. He didn't care about the logistics or the potential chaos of being recognized. Michael's time was running out. That was all that mattered. Now sitting in the hospital's waiting area, Keanu thought back to the letter again. He wondered about Emma, how she must have felt writing those words, sending them out like a prayer into the void. And Michael. What was he like? He'd pictured the boy dozens of times over the past few days. A young man with a fighting spirit, someone who clung to stories of heroism because they mirrored the strength he'd had to summon every day of his life. Keanu sighed, shifting slightly in his seat. The rigid plastic of the hospital chair dug into his back, but he didn't care. The whispers around him had grown louder, but he stayed focused, replaying the moments that had brought him here. The truth was, he wasn't just here for Michael. He was here for Kim, for Ava, for Jennifer, and for the piece of himself that still believed in the power of small kindnesses, in the magic of moments that could transform a day, a life. When the young nurse returned from the station, her steps quick with urgency, Keanu straightened. Her expression was brighter now, her voice low but full of hope. "Mr. Reeves," she said, glancing nervously at the security guard. "I spoke to the sister, Emma. She said she didn't expect you to arrive so quickly, but she's overjoyed that you're here. She's coming down to meet you." Keanu's lips curved into a faint smile. "Thank you," he said. As the nurse hurried back down the corridor, Keanu exhaled slowly. He adjusted his cap, pulling it slightly lower, as if bracing himself for what was to come. The image of Michael, frail yet strong in spirit, loomed large in his mind. Whatever waited beyond those ward doors, he was ready. The elevator doors chimed open, and Emma Hernandez stepped out, her face flushed from the hurried walk down the corridor. She was young, maybe 19 or 20, with tired eyes that carried the weight of the past few years. Her hand gripped her phone tightly, and as her gaze landed on Keanu, she froze, her breath catching audibly. You really came, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu stood, his presence calm and grounded. "Hi, Emma," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm here for Michael." Emma blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. She took a shaky step closer, then another, until she was standing in front of him. "I don't even know what to say," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't think you'd actually see my letter. I mean, we're just—" She trailed off, looking down at her shoes. Keanu placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Hey, you don't have to say anything," he said. "Let's just make today special for Michael, okay?" Emma nodded quickly, brushing away a tear. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you so much." The moment was interrupted by the clearing of a throat. Timothy, the receptionist, was still standing behind the desk, looking uneasy. "Ms. Hernandez, I need to confirm this with the attending physician before I can let anyone in," he said, his tone clipped, but not unkind. Emma turned to him, her expression shifting to frustration. "Please, Timothy, this is my brother's dying wish. Can't you just—" "It's protocol," Timothy cut in, though there was an edge of apology in his voice. "You know I can't make exceptions without clearance." Keanu raised a hand, stepping forward to diffuse the tension. "It's all right," he said. "I can wait." The security guard, still lingering nearby, spoke up. "Look, Mr. Reeves, no offense, but this is a hospital, not a movie set. Rules are rules. We can't just let anyone walk in, even if—" He hesitated, clearly aware of who he was addressing. Emma opened her mouth to argue, but Keanu stopped her with a quiet shake of his head. "I understand," he said, his tone measured. "I'll stay right here until everything's cleared. No rush." Despite the calm in his voice, the air was thick with tension. Emma bit her lip, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath, her frustration directed more at the system than anyone in particular. Moments later, a nurse in green scrubs emerged from the ward doors, clipboard in hand. Her name tag read, Karen, and she looked like she'd seen her fair share of chaos. She approached the desk briskly, her eyes scanning the scene before landing on Emma. "What's going on here?" Karen asked. Emma stepped forward. "This is Keanu Reeves," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He's here to see my brother. Michael's been asking for him for weeks. He's running out of time, Karen." Karen glanced at Keanu, her brow furrowing in recognition. "Wait, you're really Keanu Reeves?" Keanu nodded once, his expression kind but serious. "I am. I just want to spend a little time with Michael." Karen's face softened, but she hesitated, glancing at Timothy and the security guard. "I need to confirm this with Dr. Patel," she said. "Give me 5 minutes." As Karen disappeared back into the ward, Emma turned to Keanu, guilt etched into her features. "I'm so sorry about all this. It shouldn't be this hard." "Emma," Keanu said gently, "don't apologize. These people are just doing their jobs. We'll get there." Still, the minutes that followed felt agonizingly long. Emma paced back and forth, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Keanu remained seated, calm and quiet, though his eyes occasionally flicked to the ward doors, as if willing them to open. Finally, Karen returned, her expression resolute. "Dr. Patel gave the green light," she said, "but we have to keep the visit short. 20 minutes, tops." Emma let out a shaky breath of relief, her hands covering her mouth. "Thank you," she whispered. Keanu stood, adjusting his cap. "Thank you, Karen," he said with genuine gratitude. As Karen swiped her keycard to unlock the doors, the weight of the moment settled over them. Emma clutched Keanu's arm briefly, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "He's going to be so happy," she whispered. Keanu nodded, his voice low and steady. "Let's go make it count." The heavy doors swung open, revealing the dimly lit corridor of the cancer ward. The hum of machines and the faint beeping of monitors filled the air. Emma led the way, her pace quickening with every step, and Keanu followed, his heart steadying itself for what lay ahead. When they reached room 214, Emma paused at the door, her hand trembling on the handle. She looked back at Keanu, her eyes searching his face. "He doesn't know you're coming," she said, a small, tearful smile breaking through. "He's going to lose it." Keanu offered her a faint smile in return. "That's the plan." As the door creaked open, the sound of Michael's labored breathing drifted out, soft but persistent. Keanu stepped inside, his presence calm and steady. For a brief moment, time seemed to hold its breath. The room was small, bathed in the muted light of a single lamp by the bedside. Machines hummed softly in the background, their rhythm steady but fragile. Michael lay propped up on a stack of pillows, his thin frame nearly swallowed by the oversized hospital gown. His skin was pale, his cheeks hollow, but his eyes were alive with a quiet fire. He was staring at the small television mounted to the wall, where an old copy of The Matrix played, his lips mouthing the words in time with Neo's. "Michael," Emma said softly, stepping into the room. Michael glanced over, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Hey, Em," he said, his voice hoarse but warm. Then as his gaze shifted to the man standing quietly behind her, the words caught in his throat. He blinked, his brows knitting together in disbelief. "No way," he whispered. Keanu stepped forward, his hands loosely at his sides. "Hi, Michael," he said, his voice calm but filled with warmth. "It's nice to finally meet you." Michael stared, his eyes darting between Keanu and Emma, as if trying to confirm this wasn't some fever dream. This can't be real," he breathed. "You're here? You're actually here?" Keanu smiled, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "I am," he said simply. "Your sister told me how big a fan you are. I couldn't stay away." Michael's eyes welled up, and he let out a laugh that quickly turned into a cough. Emma moved to his side, gently rubbing his back. "I told you," she whispered, her own voice trembling. "I told you I'd try." Keanu leaned forward slightly, his tone playful. "I hear you're a Matrix expert," he said. "Better than me, even." Michael let out another small laugh, shaking his head. "I don't know about that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I could probably quote the whole thing if you asked me to." Keanu tilted his head, his smile widening. "Then how about this?" he said. "Why don't we act out a scene together? Your sister mentioned you might have something in mind." Michael froze, his mouth opening slightly as he struggled to process the words. "You mean you'd really do that?" "Absolutely," Keanu said, his tone gentle but firm. "Pick your favorite scene, and let's do it." Emma reached for a folder sitting on the nightstand and handed it to Michael. His hands trembled as he opened it, revealing a stack of pages. "I, wrote this," he said shyly, glancing at Keanu. "It's not from the movie exactly. It's more like my version of a Matrix scene. I wanted to imagine what it'd be like to be in that world, you know?" Keanu took the pages, scanning them quickly. The writing was rough but full of heart, the story bursting with imagination. Michael had written himself into the Matrix, a young fighter named Zane, chosen by Neo to join the Resistance. "This is incredible," Keanu said sincerely. "Let's do it." Emma moved to the corner of the room, her phone in hand, capturing the moment as Keanu stood and extended his hand toward Michael. "Zane," Keanu said, slipping seamlessly into Neo's stoic tone. "I need you to make a choice. Are you ready to fight?" Michael's face transformed. For a moment, the weight of his illness seemed to lift as he nodded with conviction. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. What followed was a surreal, beautiful blend of reality and fiction. Keanu guided Michael through the scene, prompting him when he faltered, his presence radiating patience and encouragement. Michael's voice grew stronger with each line, his frail hands clutching the imaginary red pill as he delivered his character's monologue about courage and choice. Outside the room, nurses and doctors had gathered quietly, drawn by the sound of Michael's laughter and the unmistakable cadence of Keanu's voice. Emma stood by the door, her phone forgotten, tears streaming down her face as she watched her brother come alive in a way she hadn't seen in years. As the scene came to an end, Michael leaned back against his pillows, his chest heaving with effort, but his face glowing with joy. "That was the best moment of my life," he said, his voice breaking. Keanu reached out, resting a hand lightly on Michael's shoulder. "You were amazing," he said softly. "You've got the heart of a true warrior." Now, Michael's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't look away. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything. You have no idea what this means to me." Keanu's voice was low, almost a whisper. "I think I do." For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the steady hum of the machines. Emma moved to her brother's side, wrapping an arm around him as he closed his eyes, a peaceful smile still on his lips. Outside, as Keanu stepped into the corridor, one of the nurses stopped him, her own eyes red-rimmed. "What you did in there, that was something I'll never forget," she said. Keanu nodded, his face thoughtful. "Neither will I." The hospital was quiet as Keanu made his way toward the exit, the fluorescent lights above casting a soft glow on the polished floors. The weight of the moment lingered with him, the memory of Michael's radiant smile etched firmly in his mind. It wasn't just another fan interaction, not just another fleeting moment. It was something deeper, a connection that would stay with him forever. Behind him, the door to room 214 was still slightly ajar. Inside, Emma sat beside her brother, holding his hand as he dozed peacefully. The script he'd written lay open on the bed, marked with Keanu's handwritten notes of encouragement in the margins. For the first time in weeks, Michael's breathing was steady, his face calm. A nurse stopped Keanu near the entrance, hesitating before speaking. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, her expression earnest, "what you did for that boy." She shook her head, struggling to find the right words. "I've been working in this ward for years, and I've never seen anything like it. Thank you." Keanu gave her a small smile, tilting his cap lower. "Michael did more for me than I did for him," he said quietly. The automatic doors slid open, and the cool night air rushed in to meet him. Outside, the city stretched on, alive with its usual hum of lights and traffic. Keanu took a deep breath, letting the cold settle in his lungs as he lingered on the sidewalk for a moment. A light tap on the glass behind him caught his attention. Turning, he saw Emma standing by the hospital's main doors, her hand raised in a small wave. She stepped out, shivering slightly in the chill, but her face was resolute. "Mr. Reeves," she called softly, her voice carrying a mix of gratitude and awe. Keanu turned to face her fully. "Emma," he said gently, "how's Michael?" She smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "He's happy," she said. "Really happy. I haven't seen him like that in so long." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. You've given us something we'll carry forever." Keanu reached out, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I just wanted to honor his wish, and yours." Emma bit her lip, glancing down before looking back up at him. "It's not just about that. You didn't have to come. You didn't have to care. But you did, and it means everything." Keanu's gaze softened. "Sometimes," he said after a pause, "it's not about what we have to do. It's about what we can do." Emma nodded, her tears spilling over as she offered a trembling smile. "Michael always said you were a hero," she whispered. "He was right." Keanu gave her a faint smile, tipping his cap slightly before stepping back. "Take care of him," he said, "and take care of yourself too." With that, he turned and walked toward the street, his figure blending into the quiet hum of the city. Emma watched him go, her heart full, before heading back inside to be with her brother. The next morning, the story of Keanu's visit began to ripple outward. Emma, reluctant at first, shared a small part of the experience online, wanting people to know not about the celebrity, but about the kindness of the man who had given her brother a moment of pure joy. The post went viral, as stories like these tend to do. People across the world were moved, not just by the act itself, but by the humility and quiet grace with which it was carried out. Messages poured in for Emma and Michael, words of encouragement, admiration, and hope. But Keanu never acknowledged the story publicly. To him, it wasn't about recognition or praise. It was about a promise fulfilled, a fleeting moment of light in a world that often feels too dark. In the days that followed, Michael's health began to decline, but his spirit remained unshaken. He spoke often of that day, recounting every detail of the scene he'd performed with Keanu, his voice filled with pride and wonder. When the time finally came, he passed away peacefully, his family by his side. At his memorial, Emma placed the pages of his script on top of his casket, along with a small note Keanu had left for him. The world always needs fighters like you. K.R. As Emma stood in the quiet of the cemetery that evening, she found herself thinking about the idea of choice. Michael had spent so much of his life fighting, not because he had to, but because he could. And in the end, that choice had given his family a strength they would carry forever. And somewhere, in the hum of another city, Keanu Reeves stepped quietly into another day, his heart a little heavier, but his resolve a little stronger.